So Russia just blew up a dam in Ukraine, flooding the routes to one of their key defensive hubs in the east. We also have new Russian nuclear threats that tend to come about when things are not exactly going to plan. Now, starting out, this is footage released by Russia a couple days ago showing a Fab 3000 strike on a Ukrainian dam in Donetsk. Specifically, Deep State said, quote, "The Russians blew up a dam in the area of the populated settlement of Osikove." And turning to a map to show you where this is playing out, we've got Donetsk here being shown in the middle of the map, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk. Of course, this is an area of some of the heaviest fighting in Ukraine. Kostiantianyvka is where we're going to be looking to start. This is where the bomb was dropped to cut off Ukraine's ability to keep this pocket resupplied. So you'll see here just to the northwest, Osikove, right here, one of the access points moving into Kostiantianyvka. The dam that was hit, I believe, was right here. So just to the south of that location. And we've got some footage that will play showing the fallout of that, but that is going to make, according to Ukrainian sources, it's significantly harder to keep this area of Kostiantianyvka supplied. Again, turning back to Deep State and their assessment, they said the enemy is increasing its activity in the battles for Kostiantianyvka, trying to affect the logistics of the city. Initially, the Russians destroyed one of the bridges on the northwestern outskirts to worsen the logistics. However, the Ukrainian military began to build alternate routes, which did not greatly affect the enemy's plans. So the Russians decided to use a 3-ton guided aerial bomb at night, destroying a dam in the settlement of Osikove. The result was the flooding of the area, where the water reached the Druzhkivka-Konstantinivka road, turning a section into a solid swamp and passage through it currently impossible, according to the soldiers themselves. It cannot be said that the logistics to the city will be completely stopped because there are other routes through which supplies, movement, etc. will be organized. However, the Russians have definitely managed to worsen it, at least for a certain period of time. Another violation of the norms of international humanitarian law by the Russians, but this is another indicator that the Russians are increasing their attention to Kostiantianyvka, and the impact on logistics is the beginning of preparations for more decisive actions of further concentrated and defined forces, because today they are probing our defensive perimeter and looking for weak points to get into the city. The southwestern portion in the area of Ilanivka and Berestevka is a warning sign. So again, we have seen, going back to the map here, to show the situation in Kostiantianyvka that I feel like is not getting as much attention as it probably should. We are going to talk about the Ukrainian attacks in Zaporizhzhia here in a minute. Pokrovsk and Dobropilya, of course, to the west here, getting a lot of focus, as they should. And then all of this kind of hinges on or leans to what happens with Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, the hub of Ukrainian defensive operations in the east. Kostiantianyvka is kind of flying under the radar and has for a while, but we have in recent months seen Russian forces start to push north into these two areas in the southwest. Again, that's confirmed by Deep State map here. And now with the flooding of this general area to the northwest, it does limit how Ukraine is able to get in and out of the city of Kostiantianyvka itself. But it's not just this area. Again, Deep State highlighting that this is showing a focus on this specific pocket by Russian forces right now. But a little further north, Kramatorsk, we're starting to see some pressure from the east that needs to be getting, again, more attention. This line has held so strong for so long and is inflicting such significant casualties on Russians that I think at times we kind of forget that they are moving forward, and every kilometer that they advance, albeit very slow and at a very significant cost, puts these hubs of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk at risk. Ukrainian mill blogger Mirishkov, talking about this area in Kramatorsk, says, quote, "The situation there is worsening. The Russians from Soledar have already passed Nikorivka and have become very close to Rai-Oskandrivka." I'm just butchering names here. We're going to look at the map. So what he's talking about is this area here. We're already seeing the Russian forces move into Nikorivka and starting to push a little bit north to this area. And you can see, and he's going to call this out in a second, very close to the outskirts of Kramatorsk. He said from this area, if they advance to this town up north, they're only 10 kilometers straight line distance to Sloviansk and 16 kilometers straight line distance to Kramatorsk. What he brings up, the issue here is this is going to allow Russian forces to be within barrel and rocket artillery range of these two key Ukrainian cities. He says this will significantly change the configuration of the front and the very meaning of the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, which after this will no longer be able to be used as a main logistical hub. There, not only can the railway be forgotten, but the movement of evacuation buses will resemble a roulette, so almost unnoticeable in the media space, but big troubles are approaching, and it all started with the loss of Seversk a couple weeks ago. We can't lose focus on what's happening out here. We've talked a lot recently about the movement of Russian forces towards this road that is keeping Sloviansk and Kramatorsk supplied from the north. They're pushing in multiple directions, from the south, from the east, from the north. This is clearly a focus, has never stopped being a focus of the Russian military. It doesn't look like they're going to be able to achieve taking Donetsk at the negotiating table. So we should expect to see a continued push by the military trying to take whatever they can, again, at rather significant losses. Now, we did get a new Russian nuclear threat the other day. So while we look on the map and we do see some Russian progress in the east and Ukrainian progress in the south, big picture, it doesn't look like Russia is all too keen on the direction this is headed. This was a new one. Hadn't come across this before. So according to Russian media TASS, they say Britain and France are preparing to arm Kyiv with a nuclear bomb, according to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. They say the British and French want to disguise the transfer of nuclear weapons to Kyiv as being developed by Ukraine itself. Our favorite Russian nuclear fearmonger here, Dmitry Medvedev, said, quote, "I'll say an obvious and harsh thing. Information from the Foreign Intelligence Service about France and Britain's intention to transfer nuclear technologies to the Kyiv Nazi regime radically changes the situation. And the point here is not the destruction of the Non-Proliferation Treaty and something else in international law. This is a direct transfer of nuclear weapons to a warring country. There can't be the slightest doubt that Russia, in such a development of events, will have to use any, including non-strategic nuclear weapons against targets in Ukraine that pose a threat to our country. And if necessary, against the supplier countries, which become accomplices in a nuclear conflict with Russia. This is the symmetrical response to which the Russian Federation has a right." So Medvedev saying if France and the UK smuggle nuclear weapons into Ukraine, then France and UK become viable targets for Russian nuclear strikes. Just to step back on this one real quick, you're talking about countries that have been very slow to provide fighter jets and tanks and even missiles in their own, conventional missiles in their own arsenal. And we are to believe that they're going, you know what, F-16s might have been a bridge too far. That could provoke Russia too much. But let's just smuggle some nuclear weapons in and try to convince the world that those were produced by Ukraine. Something tells me this one's a borderline completely made up by the Russians. But either way, that's the newest Russian nuclear threat aimed at not just Ukraine, but some of our NATO allies in Europe as well. I wanted to give you guys a quick update on some fundraisers. So we've got actually a vehicle just delivered to 3rd Assault Brigade this week. This is a fundraiser at the end of 2025. We were just getting them drones, and that fundraiser went far enough over that they said, wait a minute, if we have all those funds, we also need a vehicle. Just got one for those guys. Check out the wheels on that thing. That's going to be huge for driving around Izium and some of those areas in the east where the potholes are significant, to say the least. But we've got these ongoing campaigns with Car for Ukraine. Technically, we wrapped this one up. The first one, the winter offensive piece, we went over that goal. But this is all part of a larger campaign to supply the 104th with vehicles, the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade, throughout the course of the year. So this one is still open, technically, like we're batching them. We've got some new patches coming out, things like that, new interviews coming out with these soldiers. But this website will continue to be in my bio, in the description of videos. So if you ever have an inclination to donate and pick up one of these patches or anything, or get your name on the side of a vehicle, that'll be going on all year. Now, a quick update from the team over at Car for Ukraine about these vehicles. They said, quote, "The first truck will be deploying tomorrow," so February 27th. The video that they'll publish on YouTube will be around Wednesday or Thursday next week. They will be able to send over photos and videos earlier, so we'll be sharing that with you all. Again, your donations over the course of just last month already purchased the vehicles, refurbished the vehicles, and they are on their way to Ukraine tomorrow. So excited to share some of those updates with you guys as they come out. Again, for those interested and able, the link to contribute to this ongoing campaign for the rest of the year will be in the description below. Now, when I turn back over to a battlefield update in the Zaporizhzhia direction, this is an area where we've seen Ukrainian offensive actions in recent weeks, and for the first time, we're starting to get some official announcements from the Ukrainian side. Bakhmut Demon, a Ukrainian soldier here with a good statement saying, quote, "The guys from Artan wreaked havoc in Stepnogorsk on the Zaporizhzhia front and continue to turn the Russian infantry into mincemeat." We've actually got some footage of those guys operating that we'll play here as well. The Ukrainian military did start to put out some actual assessments recently, with the airborne assault forces saying, quote, "In general, the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction can be characterized as very dynamic. The Russians cling to every meter of captured territory, using all available resources, both human and technical. But despite his fierce resistance, the units of the group are fulfilling their tasks and step-by-step liberating their native land. Since the beginning of the operation, the airborne assault forces, together with adjacent units, have restored control over more than 300 square kilometers. They say this is area cleared of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in an additional 8 populated areas. They say while the active phase of the operation is ongoing, it's a bit premature to talk about their final results." Now, when we're talking about the significant areas being cleared out, we're largely looking at the gray zones here in kind of the northern or the eastern portion of the Zaporizhzhia front, where we have seen for a while now Russia continue to overextend and exaggerate their claims. And in a lot of these cases, it was not Ukraine clearing out battalion-sized elements of Russian forces, but rather 1, 2, 3, or 4 Russians dispersed in various fighting positions and basements. And we saw dedicated assault units clear through here, eliminating and in many cases capturing those Russian soldiers. In fact, from the commander, Perun, of the Ukrainian 1st Assault Brigade, one of the elements that led this charge, he said, quote, "We are not conducting an operation that has the character of counteroffensive actions with sufficient depth of penetration into the operational zone. Instead, tactical improvements and the buildup of our forces are taking place." According to him, the goal of the Ukrainian actions is to force the Russians to exhaust resources on stopping our advance and not allowing him to use reserves in the main plan. And this brings up, when you look at counteroffensives or counterattacks, whatever you want to frame this, I think counterattack is probably a better term. There's a lot of different objectives involved there. It's not necessarily about, when we see Ukrainian forces pushing here, about pushing all the way through Russian lines and retaking all of Zaporizhzhia or something, right? In a lot of cases, and this is a good example, Russian forces continue to mass, and they've kind of had their steady, slow grind forward in this direction, as they have in multiple areas of the front. So when Ukraine counterattacks and throws that off balance, it forces Russia to reallocate forces and change up some of their logistical routes and reinforce some areas so they don't collapse. It changes the Russian plan. It throws it off kilter. It sets it back days, weeks, months, maybe even years. So that's something to keep in mind with any counterattack, is the very important aspect of throwing off the enemy's plans. Now, the mention earlier about Artan operating was actually in the western area of Zaporizhzhia over here, right along the Dnipro. This is an area, again, that we saw Russia overextend in recent months, and it does look like elements of GUR specifically have been pushing back here. They put out a statement saying, quote, "During the operation, in conditions of complex logistics and constant attempts by the Russians to hold positions and using the method of meat assaults, the fighters of Artan regained control over important positions and significantly improved the tactical situation on the specified section of the front. An important component of the special operation was the cutting of the enemy's key logistical arteries by establishing fire control over them. Strikes on the logistics and communication nodes of the Russian occupiers currently make it impossible for them to storm in the indicated direction." Again, what appears to be an objective here is not necessarily the recapturing of territory and pushing the Russians back 5, 10, 20 kilometers, but cutting off their supply routes and making it to where they can no longer advance, or at least not anytime soon, in that particular direction. Again, I think the Kupiansk direction is a good indication of what this looks like. You cut off an area, clear through that. Russia is likely going to continue to try pushing in all of these different directions, but it sets them back a significant period of time. In fact, looking at the Russian assessment of what is happening in Zaporizhzhia, not a lot in the west at this point. Shifting over to the east, though, we do have some updates from Rybar, where they say, quote, "Ukrainian formations continue to expand the area of the breakthrough in the areas of Orostpol. A while ago, there was already information about the breakthrough of the armed forces of Ukraine in Ternove, but it was now possible to confirm it visually. So again, looking at this area in the center of the map, saying this is, and we did get some videos from the Ukrainian forces as well, showing them in this town. So Russia at one point said, we have taken that, we have occupied that town, and Ukraine pretty quickly put out a video saying, where are you? Rybar said, quote, due to the temporary lag in the publication of the video and unstable weather conditions, it is not yet possible to establish the current configuration on the front of the site. Such a fog of war persists throughout Zaporizhzhia, where the positions of both sides turned out to be intermingled with each other. In the south of Perluki, so zooming out here a little bit, heading towards the Huliopoli area in this general direction, the situation remains difficult. In fact, the village is not under the control of any parties, and for the last month has been the scene of heavy battles. Ukrainian formations are making attempts to gain a foothold in the central portion, but assault groups are quickly dispersed by drones and infantry. They say, in general, despite the information noise, the pace of the offensive of the armed forces of Ukraine is gradually decreasing. The enemy spent significant reserves, but only achieved limited results. Again, we don't know the overall objectives of this operation. According to Ukraine and the commander of the First Assault Brigade? Is that right? Yeah, First Assault Brigade, Perun. He said the goal was to kind of reestablish Ukrainian positions and clear out infiltrators. So it's entirely possible that that objective was met. Russia might be measuring this in terms of being pushed back, again, 5, 10, 20 kilometers. That may or may not have been the Ukrainian goal. I would argue that right now there's not a lot of places that Ukraine has the manpower or the equipment in depth to really exploit a 5, 10 kilometer breakthrough in the Russian lines and subsequently manning that in a way to actually hold that territory. That's not where the war is right now. Now, of course, a major component of this fight continues to be the long-range strikes carried out not just by Russia, and we had a pretty significant attack overnight, but Ukraine recently released some footage showing their new Flamingo missiles being utilized, striking pretty significant targets deep inside of Russia. Now, starting with the Russian strikes overnight, it looks like more than 400 total munitions were utilized. Ukrainian President Zelensky said tonight, Russia again waged war against critical infrastructure and ordinary residential buildings. 420 drones, most of them Shahed, and 39 missiles, including 11 ballistic missiles, were launched at our people. There is a destruction in 8 regions. Many private and multi-story buildings have been damaged. As of now, dozens of people have been injured as a result of the attack, including children. They also targeted gas infrastructure in the Poltava region and power substations in Kyiv and Dnipro. Now, according to the Ukrainian Air Force, they gave a roll-up of the types and number of munitions used here. They say they were able to successfully intercept 2 of 2 Zircon anti-ship missiles, shot down 4 of 11 Iskander ballistic missiles, brought down all 24 KH-101 cruise missiles, as well as both KH-69 air-to-ground missiles, and then 374 of 420 enemy UAVs were brought down. That means that a total of 7 missiles got through, as well as 46 drones. Real quick, I feel like more attention should be paid. Shows how numb the world is becoming to 400 munitions fired into Ukraine overnight. And it didn't set any records. It didn't, this is not the most ever fired in a night. It's not the most that have gotten through, but this is a regular occurrence. And this is what we should expect to see in Ukraine for the foreseeable future. There's limited progress at the front. This is a way that Russia is able to inflict damage. So right now it's 400. It's probably going to get up to 500. And I would expect in 2026, we're going to see nights nearing 1,000 munitions fired into Ukraine in a single night. Now, for their part, the Russian Ministry of Defense said the goals of the strike were achieved. All assigned targets were successfully engaged. Now, on the Ukrainian side, we did get some footage recently showing what appears to be the Flamingo launch. I believe this is called the FP5, the long-range, big cruise missile. So it sounds like they carried out one of their longest-range, highest-value strikes of the war, hitting an Iskander ballistic missile production site in Votkinsk. Now, that would have flown around 1,300 kilometers from the front lines, striking one of the 19 major facilities at the plant. And we have started to get not just footage of the launch, but footage of the strike, and then some aftermath from these 2 facilities. So we first had the Iskander missile site hit, and the second was the Neftogorsk gas processing plant. On this one, we've got a little more footage showing the aftermath. Clearly, a lot of damage done here. Almost 1,000 kilometers behind the front lines, massive blaze as that missile impacted the location. A couple of key takeaways here. First off, Ukraine, we've seen the Flamingo talked about for quite a while now. There was some speculation about where it maybe had been used. It looks like now we have confirmation, just based off the results of these strikes, that something big got through. And one of the challenges that Ukraine has had in their long-range strike is they've been able to fly some of these drones a long ways. Generally, that comes with a smaller payload. So it just is very difficult to get a big payload, a large warhead, a long ways away. That's generally the trade-off being made. This is a big boom. And the fact that Ukraine is able to effectively strike these targets at that distance means a couple really important things. One, they have them in some degree of production numbers, right? So there's not one Flamingo, there's not two. There's some number to where they feel comfortable actually utilizing these operationally. They've been through testing, they have some number being launched. Second, they're getting through, which the whole host of questions there, right? This has to fly through a lot of Russian territory and was able to do so. We don't know if in each one of these cases 20 Flamingos were launched and one got through, or 2 were launched and 1 got through, or 1 of 1. That's not known. Russian interception data is very hard to decipher in terms of what they shot down and where. But the fact that even one of these massive, long-range, heavy payload cruise missiles made it in one case 1,300 kilometers through the front line is significant. When you remember the conversation about the U.S. providing Tomahawk cruise missiles, in fact, Senator Lindsey Graham just yesterday said, let's do it. Let's give Ukraine some of these Tomahawks. That's a comparable weapon system with a shorter range and a smaller payload. I would argue that the Tomahawk is probably more capable of penetrating Russian air defenses. There's going to be a lot more of them, and it is probably more accurate. Again, we don't have a one-to-one test, but in absence of that, it looks like Ukraine has found a viable workaround, and as of now, is effectively hitting strategic Russian targets. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.